Oh, I realize we are going to have a problem here. Yeah, but when I speak, there will be an echo, so I have to kind of... Okay, perfect. 1, 2, 3. So it should be okay now. Any questions?
Francis, few clarification. First, regarding the yoga, it is beneficial to have some flexibility to do this yoga more beautiful way to what am I? Because it was challenging.
Yeah, there are two kinds of flexibility. There is a functional flexibility and there is psychological flexibility. We have an expression in French that says, that goes raide comme la justice. So it means stiff like a judge or something like that. You know, that would be the translation. Stiff like justice, but stiff like a judge. So it shows that our psychological stiffness, lack of, translates also in the body. You know, I often mention people when they shake your hand, they push you. You know, there is no, they don't. People have all kinds of weird handshakes, you know, and I'm not mentioning any. Okay. And so this stiffness, which is in fact often subconscious. People are not aware of this stiffness. This stiffness is taken care of by this yoga we are doing. Now, there is an additional form of stiffness that may be due to aging, to when I get up, I have some lower back issues, so I'm not like when I was in my 20s. But these are somatic issues, they are not psychological issues. The yoga may help with these types of stiffness, or in some case maybe even detrimental if you push it too far. This yoga is not fitness yoga. You know, tennis players, they do fitness yoga. Basically, they use the asanas to do stretches to increase the range of motion. So, there is a fringe benefit to this yoga in this regard, that if you practice it regularly, you will improve your range of motion and your somatic stiffness. But it is not that which we are after. We are after the psychological stiffness. But there is this added benefit, and in fact, before I practiced this yoga, I was practicing Hatha Yoga with a teacher who was not bad at all. He was Vietnamese monk, Buddhist monk, who went to the Himalayas and got some yoga there, and that he was teaching in Marseille, in the south of France. But when I met Jean Klein and I changed, I didn't change right away, but after 1 year, it took me 1 year to transition from this yoga I was used to practice to this tantric element. I noticed that even in regarding the range of motion, I was improving faster with this yoga. And I think that the reason is that if we try to go all the way in a stretch, the body resists. Whereas if we do very progressive, sustainable stretches, the body says, no big deal. I let go because it's not painful. I let go. And then, after a while, gets used to this, to this new position, the body allows to go more. And so that's why I say sustainable stretches. If the body cannot do the postures that we suggest here, you do your best to do some approximation. It may be a very distant approximation. For instance, when we were laying on the floor in the beginning, I said, oh, so stretch your... Well, if you are sitting on the chair, you can always do this. You cannot do it with your legs, of course, but so that's the kind of adaptations that you can design. Yes. It helps to become aware of the body. You know, some people are not aware of their body. Some people, you ask them, place your arms like this, you see, and then you look at them and they are like that. And they believe they are horizontal.
The second clarification, is correct to say the relationship to intellect, to consciousness, is like a concept to understanding or concept to reality?
So relationship between what and what?
Intellect to wisdom, intelligence, is like a concept to reality himself.
Yes, the connection between, it depends what you call intellect, I don't use this word, but between mind and intelligence is the same as
a concept to reality himself.
Well, mind is concept. So, mind and concept, I mean, concept is part of mind.
Yes.
We have to keep in mind regarding this yoga that if we would be doing only one thing, it would be to offer the bodily sensations to the space. That's the yoga. The postures are just one way to relax the body, one way to explore the sensations in more detail, but they are not important. They are not important. I did more posture today because then people say, oh, Francis, yoga, it's not yoga. So tomorrow we'll stand on the head. I have to practice a little bit because I haven't done it in 20 years. So, so tonight I'll practice, tomorrow
Because when we use the word intellectual understanding, it not make sense because they are two different realms.
Yeah, I don't really use the word intellectual understanding, but if I were to use it, it would mean an understanding that we reach through concepts. In other words, there is a thought process that leads to this understanding, right? But any form of understanding is experiential. Especially any understanding about consciousness is obviously experiential. Because the only way to understand, we can understand something about consciousness, is because we go to the experience of consciousness, and looking at the experience of consciousness, we say, yes, that's true.
That's the reason because we have a two-way to inquiry, through the thought or through the sensation, through the body.
Yes, that's true. Yes, yes. Yeah. And also, these are not the only ways, because it could be said also through the external sense perceptions, through the sensations, and through the thought. There is a path through the thought of intelligence, if you will, through the bodily sensations, that would be the path of love, and through the external sense perceptions, the path of beauty. But of course, you know, these distinctions, it's like, you know, the Four Noble Truths. I mean, you can divide it in 4, or in 3, or in 7, or in...
No, this is for me important.
The 10,000 things, you know.
It is important to, because when you have a glimpse of understanding, is still not full understanding that who you are.
Well, it depends on the question we ask. The understanding puts an end to a question, you know. How do I know that 2 plus 5 equals 7, I think. You see, so then you ask the question, how much is 2 plus 5? Then you say 5 plus 2, and then you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7. So then you get it. You know, you have the understanding. So the question that was asked is, how much is 2 plus 5? And you get the answer to the question you ask. It can be a question that has nothing to do with consciousness. It can be a question that relates to consciousness. Now, among the questions that relate to consciousness, not all of them will qualify as liberating glimpses. A lot of those questions will qualify as partial glimpses. For instance, understanding that I know about consciousness through the direct experience of consciousness. That's a glimpse to understand that. You see? Is it a liberating glimpse? Not yet. Why? Because although I have understood something important, this consciousness I experience could still be limited. So because this consciousness could still be limited, although this glimpse is important, because it reveals a new channel of exploration. It reveals that consciousness can be experienced directly. So this glimpse is important, but it doesn't liberate us completely, because, so that's a partial glimpse about consciousness, in a way. So these glimpses take us up on the ladder of...
Francis, why you said is limited? Because if you have a glimpse of consciousness, as nature of consciousness is unlimited, so therefore it cannot be limited.
No. if you ask a question, and the question is, can consciousness experience consciousness? That's a question. You go to the experience through which you know that you are conscious, and the answer to this question is yes. That's a glimpse. But this glimpse tells you only that consciousness can experience consciousness. This glimpse doesn't tell you that consciousness is infinite. Okay? You have a question, you get your answer, you look at the answer, yes, the answer is give you a few elements, but not the full enchilada. Okay? So there are many partial glimpses. Like for instance, is consciousness real? Or am I making it up? You see? So you go to the experience of consciousness and you may decide from this experience, yes, it's real. I'm not making it up. Consciousness is real as an experience. So then, the reality of consciousness is somehow also a glimpse. But there could be, a priori, many real consciousnesses. It doesn't tell you this glimpse that consciousness is universal.
And then you ask, is consciousness universal? And you investigate it and you say yes. But it still is a glimpse.
If you say yes from experience to this question, that's a liberating glimpse. The glimpse liberates you the moment you go beyond the limitations of an individual consciousness. When consciousness equals reality, in Sanskrit they have Sat, Chit, Ananda, and it's Sat equals Chit. As long as you see them different, Sat being reality, being, truth, that which never changes, and Chit being consciousness, once you see the identity of the first two, then you have peace, Ananda.
So if you answer to this question yes, and then you back to ignorance, is a fake news to say yes. It's a false answer.
If you have said yes once, any relapse is only a mechanical relapse of a thought that comes back, but a thought that has lost its true value in your eyes. So the thought can come back just because you have forgotten that you were single.
Thank you, Francis.
By the way, for our friends online, happy Thanksgiving.
Francis, I would like to present something which I think I understood, and please correct me if it's wrong. When I see body minds, it is clear to me these days that it doesn't make sense to speak of these body minds really as objects. Yes, we can speak of them as objects, but they are more like events. Is that correct?
Sure, yes.
So, and that was very revealing to me, because I think, an event, for example, a sunset is an event. It has a beginning, duration, and end. So it became clear to me that every body mind that was dear to me, that I, like every human being that was dear to me, is an event that I'm watching, that I'm experiencing. And still, although maybe I haven't completely understood what you often quote, that it is not the spouse that is loved, but it's the self in the spouse that is loved. So although I understand that I see the body minds and they are just events, I still from time to time feel this nostalgia or attachment. For example, when one of those events, like a dear relative, is no longer present, like a sunset that has passed. And then I wonder why, the memories come back, and there's still this feeling or this belief, oh, it mustn't be, it shouldn't be that I still have this nostalgia. I'm sometimes reminded of something
It depends on the nature of this nostalgia, because there is sweet nostalgia and there is desperate nostalgia. The sweet nostalgia is a remembrance of the love we have shared, you see, so then we experience the sweetness again. And burning nostalgia is, life is unbearable and I have to kill myself, So, sweet nostalgia is poetic, is something different. It's a love, I think of my mother with sweet nostalgia. I think of friends who have passed away with sweet nostalgia.
I think I do too. Thank you.
But when what you are saying about the body minds, like events, they are like clouds. You see, clouds are events. They're always transforming, changing. Unless you're in Shropshire, where there is only one cloud. I say, that's a country on oneness.
I was thinking of something, I think Nietzsche said it, although I'm not really familiar with Nietzsche, but he said something to the effect of that to see like all those beautiful, he didn't use body mind certainly, all those beautiful people or whatever, being like dying, fading, is like the finest of wine poured into the sea. Like how can, but I guess that's the price we have to pay if we want to see different clouds.
He was a nutcase. He was a big ego and a nutcase, and I mean, and we value this guy. I mean, when I was in Germany, I started reading again, Also sprach Zarathustra, and it's so pretentious, he plays the guru and he has nothing to say, really. His Zarathustra has really nothing of value to say. It's just blah, 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 word, so that everybody can see how smart Nietzsche was, and so that he can put Lou Salome in his bed. So, I mean, there is nothing, unlike Goethe, for instance, but there is nothing in Nietzsche. It's just air. I was stupid enough to learn, by Nacht ist es, nun, Nacht ist es, nun sprechen lauter alle springenden Brunnen Und auch meine Seele ist ein Springbrunnen, Nacht ist es. Nun erst erwachen alle Lieder der Liebenden und auch meine Seele ist das Lied eines Liebenden.
Doesn't sound too bad.
What?
It doesn't sound too bad. There's poetry in it, isn't it? No?
I mean, it's a waste of time to memorize that. Rilke has a little more to say than Nietzsche. So, I've already disappointed a lot of philosophers online by it's amazing with literature and philosophy, you know, how people of no value are made up, you know, and if you look at modern literature and modern philosophy, it's even worse, you know.
Well, I'll do it. Yeah. No, I'll send it back to him. Yesterday, okay, I'll just start. If you're talking about pain in the body, anticipating, they were talking about the dental appointment. I said you should get a different dentist, but you know, like if you're anticipating surgery or something where you know there's going to be recuperation is going to be difficult and everything, and there might be a sense of fear about that. You were saying the best thing is to try to cultivate, just face it when it's actually happening. But it's rather it's not the separate self that.
Well, if you take your car to be fixed, you know, there might be problems with the car. They can tell you, you know, perhaps it would be better to buy a new car, you know. So you anticipate what's going to happen. I mean. Think of your body as your car, your vehicle.
I mean, that kind of fear of pain or difficulty, I mean, that doesn't actually come from the separate self, even if it could be quite intense, if you've had that experience before and you know it's going to happen again or something like that. Is that a different kind of mistake?
The idea is to be ready to die at every moment. So if you're ready to die, you're ready to have any surgery or to go to have a root canal. I mean, there is no much point worrying ahead of time.
So you said that's a different kind of thing, to try to cultivate that understanding.
You do what is needed, and if there is pain, you take it, or you take Vicodin or whatever. Some branches of medicine, they are very good with pain. Others, they don't care about the pain of the patients. There are traditions like that. For instance, urologists, they couldn't care less about the pain of the patient, so they will all go to hell. Yeah.
Urologists.
Pulmonary surgeons, on the other hand, they are very nice. They take care of the pain of their patients. But urologists are...
I have another question. It's not related to that at all. But now I have something else to worry about.
It's mostly for males.
Okay.
So don't worry.
Oh, I got
you know.
plenty more where that came from. We have all kinds
We
of
men
things,
have
too.
more prostate problems than
Yes,
you.
that's true. We got other stuff. We'll have the battle of pain later.
It's a
okay?
quote. It's a quote of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Okay. So this other question has nothing to do with that. You talked about how you can have an understanding of, is consciousness real? Right? You can ask yourself, is consciousness? Am I conscious? Yeah, it's right there. And you had a second one, but what is there anything you can actually do to generate the knowledge that consciousness is eternal? Or is that just one of those luck things? Or universal?
Mm-hmm. Ask yourself the question, can something be real and not universal? It depends of what we define as real. The word real itself is not good, because it means a thing. It comes from the word res, thing. So the etymologic meaning of the word reality is thingness. Thingness, and that which is of the nature of a thing. So precisely, it precludes anything which is not a thing from being real. You see? So the word reality comes from an ignorant view of reality, etymologically, that grants reality to the things, to the objects. In German, they have a different word, Wirklichkeit, that comes from the word wirken, that which is the same as work, that which is efficient, the efficient cause of things. That which, in a sense, is more that which creates the movement we see, that which almost invisible, and the invisible energies that creates that which works. So, going back to reality, a separate reality, if we ask the question, can several realities coexist? And if we interact with one another, we are immediately led to conceptually see these, let's say, two mutually interacting realities, like two consciousnesses speaking with one another. How can this interaction be possible without these two realities being sub-realities of a bigger reality. You see what I mean? That enables this interaction. So then, because they are sub-realities, they are not real realities. You're following me?
Yes.
This all-encompassing reality that encompasses both is the real reality. So that's why I define consciousness as the reality which is hearing these words. So if we make the claim that we are communicating, right, it follows from that for this interaction to be possible, the reality which is hearing these words and the reality which speaks them has to be the same.
And that's the same as universal.
Well,
in essence.
if you take that for two, you can see that by extension, it has to be universal. You start with two, but then two are always reduced to one through this reasoning. It is not, I never make the claim that I prove logically anything. But I don't like if somebody tells me that they can logically prove the opposite, which is not true. Right? So if we remain purely logical, purely rational, what I am giving you are hints. They don't prove anything because the proof is within us. And what I say are just pointers so that they can lead at some point to something in you that says yes. You see? For instance, another thing that I say often is, can the world we perceive be more real than the consciousness that perceives it? Let's assume the consciousness is an illusion. It's not real. How a non-real consciousness could possibly perceive a real world? You see what I mean? So it follows from this simple pointer, again, not a proof, that consciousness is at least as real as whatever it is that it perceives. In fact, consciousness is the most real thing, another way to say it, is the most real thing we know, and it's the most real thing we experience, is the most real thing we will ever experience. It's when we go in this direction, it's a path which is a path, a pure intellectual path. It's a very valid path to the truth, but it's not for everybody. It's because it's rather philosophical, if you will. It's a path of the philosophers. And some of us, by pondering along those lines, revisiting these arguments, there is a clarification that takes place and that leads to a conviction that gets deeper and deeper. But the other path is the one which is much easier and more practical, which is the experiential path. And that's the difference there is between a mathematician and a physicist. A mathematician is purely conceptual, only concepts. Physicist takes concepts, but then conducts experiments. He can only be convinced through experiments, so the outcome of experiments. So the other path is the experiential or experimental path, which is much easier. for most of us.
Francis, last night I dreamt that I was an Italian astronaut climbing up into...
An Italian?
Yeah, yeah. I was in Italy.
There are no such things.
Well, it was a dream.
What an Italian astronaut. What an Italian astronaut.
So,
You are flying on a spaghetti?
well, I was climbing into the capsule. And as I got higher and higher, it was getting smaller and smaller, the space that I was going into, and I started to get very claustrophobic. And in the middle of this dream, I started going, I'm not a separate entity. I'm universal consciousness. And as I did that, the claustrophobia went away. So I thought that was pretty cool. Because I'm doing these kinds of things more and more, I had another one of these experiences that I brought up a few months ago. I was walking down the stairs this morning, and there it was again, where I was watching my body. My body was inside of me, or the body. It was like it was somebody else's body, and either I want to find out from you, is that kind of like part of this path?
Yes.
Okay. So when it happened, and that happened the other time, it's kind of freaky. And I would like to know from you, see, it seemed like it wasn't like my concept of watching a body in the hospital getting an operation, that you hear that. I think that I wasn't even thinking. I think that the body-mind was inside of me. So, but at some point I started to think, is there something when that happens, do you have any recommendations of how to be with that in that moment?
Yes. First, there are two kinds of out-of-body experiences. There is one in which we are a subtle body. We are identifying with a subtle body, but we are still identifying with an object. And there is another one in which we are just awareness. It's a natural realization of the body is perceived. And I am that which perceives it. So these are two very different types of experience. And it may be, and the one which is valuable is the second type. It may be that as we go to this experience, elements of fear that are present, fear of losing control, fear of disappearing, come to the surface. Because you ask me what to do. And what to do in this case is just, what the heck? Let's go for it. So don't trust the fear, just let it happen. Let it happen. Nothing bad is going to happen. But the other type of experience, out of body, There have been accounts of this guy. Yes, he was having surgery, and he found himself on the ceiling looking at his body on the operating table and registering the conversation they had, like the surgeon cutting the appendix and saying, "Where is the cat?" So, yeah.
Thank you. It's very helpful.
The cat thing, yeah.
Yesterday you were talking about some neo-Advaita terms that you're kind of poking fun at or you don't really agree with. And one came to mind earlier today that I hear a lot of, and I'm wondering what you think about this term, spiritual bypass. Have you heard this?
No.
Oh,
No,
okay.
I'm not. I'm not keeping, up to date with the latest
Okay,
fads
let me try to
of
define
Neo-Advaita.
it.
So, spiritual bypass.
Spiritual bypass. Has anybody else heard this? Yeah? Okay.
What?
I was wondering if anybody else has heard it. Yeah, it's big in my community too.
Could you define spiritual bypass?
It's like using some trick, which really is probably a trick of the mind to, like you were saying yesterday, like this mechanical welcoming where instead of doing the real investigation or the real work, you're kind of just cutting it off, and it's really in the mind. It's not actually.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah.
Is this
mechanical welcoming? I can understand that. When I arrive in an airport, you have the mayor, of welcome to Atlanta. Who cares? He couldn't he couldn't care less about me. Welcome to Atlanta. They are such bullshitters, these politicians. It was just a pretense to have his face on the. So, yeah, I understand mechanical welcoming.
Okay, so I think that's kind of the same thing as a spiritual bypass. Like people will be like, "Oh, you're just spiritually bypassed. You're not." I don't know, but it's something that kind of crept in where I wonder, like, so the other day you told me, the only choice, the only freedom I have is in the now to be consciousness or not be, right? And so I took that really seriously, and pretty automatically, every time I'm starting to feel some irrational feeling or whatever's coming up, and the light bulb goes off, and I think, do you think you're separate right now? And I'm like, oh yeah, I do, and then it kind of vanishes.
Well, yeah.
Is it just my mind fooling?
Let me explain to you. Perhaps the device you are using needs to be a little bit adjusted. So when I say we have the choice in the now, it's not the choice to be consciousness or to be separate or not to be separate. That's not the choice we have. The choice we have is to believe to be separate or to have no belief. Are you following me? It's not between believing to be separate or believing not to be separate. These are not the alternative. The alternative is either having a belief to be separate or not knowing, having no belief. You see? Because then you can connect that to the investigation you have been doing, the self-enquiry. And the result of the outcome of the self-enquiry is precisely that, based on my phenomenal evidence that I can gather and that I've gathered throughout my life, I cannot tell that I am a separate consciousness, you see? Therefore, if I believe to be a separate consciousness, then it's my choice. Whereas a wiser attitude is to say, well, I don't know. You see? And to live my life in this not knowing. So, what does it mean to live my life not knowing whether I am a limited consciousness or not? Since I have a priori no clue one way or the other. You see what I mean? No clue one way or the other. What is the logical attitude to have regarding the decisions we make? It is certainly not logical to always decide as if consciousness was separate. Right? The logical way to do it, when we have two possibilities and we have no clue which one is true, is to assume that they are equally probable. And if they are equally probable, it's a bad policy to always choose one. It's nicer to every other time to switch. You see? So, but then, if I look in hindsight in my life, I realize that for so many years, I have always chosen one side. So I have a backlog of one-sided decision to compensate, right? To improve my average. So from now on, let's say for 30 years I've chosen one way, it would make sense for at least 5 years, to choose the other way. You see? And then see what difference it makes. You see? So that's an attitude in which I don't know one way or the other, and I leave it up to life itself to tell me, am I doing the right thing? You see? So again, at every moment, if I catch myself red-handed, believing to be separate, I say, okay, no, I'm going to play this Francis lottery, right? And I'm going to put my money on the universal consciousness case. Or case, yeah? Where you put your money on the roulette or...
It's a safe bet.
Huh?
It's a safe bet.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's for you to check it out. Perhaps not. Perhaps it's dangerous. Check it out.
So first to ask, in this moment, do I believe to be limited or separate?
Yeah, the point is to move from belief to not knowing.
And usually if the alarm goes off, I realize, yes, I do believe, but then it's important to go the next step and say, well, what's the proof? What's the evidence? What's leading me to this?
And then you discover there is no evidence, and then that gives you the freedom to try the other possibility for a change.
Yeah, because I've noticed some kind of like BS evidence that will come, like...
Then you have to investigate.
And then I'm like, but then you see, like, but that's not true, and then okay.
And the biggest BS evidence is the evidence that comes from feelings. So this one is, I mean, to trust your feelings, so many divorces have their origin in trusting feelings.
Yeah.
I feel he's the guy for me. I feel she's the girl for me, because
Thank you.
Often in my meditations, I end up with an experience which seems like a duality. For example, if I would try to express or describe this experience, I could say something like, I'm resting in thy peace.
I'm resting in
Thy
peace.
Thy peace. And it seems to indicate that there are like two parties, the one resting and something or somebody in which presence I'm resting.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to figure out, what's happening. Am I kind of inventing something?
See in that case that you are the peace in which you are resting. You're not the bucket, you're the water. The bucket is in the water. There is water inside, water outside.
Yeah, so I'm both in a way.
Hmm?
I'm both.
Yeah, but
the one is resting, and
yeah, but the one who is resting is the bucket, right?
yeah.
The piece inside and the piece outside is the water. But ultimately, the bucket is made out of the water. So even that which is allegedly resting is made of the piece. But it's an appearance in the piece. So when I say I'm resting in peace, the I who is resting in peace is the last obstacle to the peace.
Right.
I am the peace is the better description. It's a flip, to flip the understanding. I am that in which the body is resting. I'm that in which the thoughts and the sensations and the mind is resting. I'm not that which is resting in it.
But then there's the sense, that there is something larger than, the I. That's that's how this sort of phrase arises.
Yes. In order to make the statement that there is something larger than the I, you make the assumption that you can measure the I, that you can see it.
Sure.
So, obviously, that's not true. Because whatever you see is not the I that sees. So you cannot make any statement regarding the size of the I that sees, because you don't see it. The fact that it is invisible in this way makes possible for it to be infinite.
Mm.
That which is perceived is always finite. That's a bucket. But you are that which perceives. and that which perceives is the peace.
Yeah, so in this case, both the I and the thou, or the thee, is perceived.
Yeah. The thou is not perceived in this case. It is inferred
Yes.
from its peace.
Right.
It is inferred as a source of the peace.
Yes. Right.
So, but the thy is the peace.
Mm.
The thy is not the peace giver. The thy is the peace. There is no peace giver. As Nietzsche used to say, God is tot.
Right.
God is dead.
So in this case, you agree with Nietzsche then? Okay, thank you.
Kind of similar. I was at Starbucks this morning, and this little girl, so cute. She had those rain boots with the lights that light up when you walk, and she spilled a glass of water and just immediately started crying. And as I was sitting there, I just fell immediately in love with her, just this love kind of pouring out. And then I noticed I wanted to reach out and hug her because she was so cute, and she was just bawling from the, just this water spilling. And then I noticed I was the one who was observing. I was having trouble figuring out where to relax my being. There was this kind of the one who was observing, the one who was feeling the love. And so I found myself uncertain where to land. And I thought, this is a wonderful, mundane, everyday opportunity. How do I kind of fully abide in those moments?
So what did you do?
I sat there for a while and just tried to stay in the love.
But she was there with her parents.
Yeah.
What did they do?
There was nothing I could do. A woman came with a mop, and she's like, "Oh dear, it's okay, it's just water." And the girl was still crying, and
Yeah, not bad.
it was very sweet. But
Not bad. She's crying, so she's learning about life.
super innocent. That was a totally innocent.
She was not made guilty for having spilled the water. I mean, it was perfect. Oh dear, yeah. Oh, it's nothing. Don't worry. But doesn't deserve too much. It doesn't. It didn't deserve. Oh, poor thing.
No, it wasn't like that.
It was not this type of context. Kids have to fall and cry. They have to spill water. And
So the question is...
difference, a little boy would have, I'm not sure a little boy would have cried. He would have just played with it. Yes, understand that. There's a girl with they are so cute with this, with the light. The light making shoes is makes you crack. Yes, yeah, I understand. Yeah. It's just human instincts. You know, when kids cry, it triggers in us a button. Do anything to stop that.
And that was just more of an expression of feeling the love and the innocence of this little girl, and this just explosion of...
Yeah, it's beautiful, yeah. But also, you know, you have to understand that kids, as I've said, have to make mistakes, to fall, to spill water, and it's part of the learning process.
I have a couple of experiences that happened yesterday that I am not very clear on. So I'll kind of describe the experiences and then what my understanding was. And it relates to the intimacy of the sensations from a few days ago. And so a few days ago we were talking, or I was talking about how much I enjoyed this expansion, expanding the intimacy into the space. And you had suggested a few other exercises that I could try, one of which was this one where you take the bodily sensation and the intimacy, and then as if with a paintbrush, you paint it onto, the wall. And for some reason, that one stuck with me. And so whenever the feeling of this intimate, an intimate bodily sensation would arise, it's not that I was doing this exercise, like where I was trying to paint it onto. It seemed that the intimacy wanted to paint itself onto the wall.
That's
like
good.
it was automatically, going to that image. And yet something felt like it was not quite, I don't know, that I was kind of...
Artificial.
It was artificial, yes.
Yes, because these exercises are artificial. The goal of this exercise, with repeated, on the yoga, we work on the body mind. We don't work on consciousness. The goal is to change the conditioning of the body mind, to replace a conditioning which is consistent with consciousness being limited and separate, with a different conditioning, which is more consistent but not perfectly consistent with consciousness being universal. Okay, so it's replacing a very bad conditioning by a conditioning which is different, more okay, if you will. Now, the result of this experiment we are conducting, in most cases, will not be obvious during, as we conduct the experiment, precisely for the reason you mentioned of the artificial aspect of this. But if we do it in moderation, when we feel like it, as an experiment, when we feel like it, we do it. We will notice after a few months, my being in the world has changed. My experience of being in the world has changed to the experience of being the world. Without you noticing it, and you won't remember, when did that begin? Well, in hindsight, if I go many years ago, I was in the world, and now I am the world. So I cannot pinpoint when it happened. There was not a turning point that I can remember. But these experiments are very, very instrumental, if you will, in operating this shift, this realignment of perception.
So I kind of attributed this artificiality to the fact that it was new, and that I knew that it was a tantric trick, so that it was meant to. Anyway, but then yesterday during the dialogue, you were talking with Catherine about prayer, and you mentioned one of the prayers is the one where everything is fine, but what I want is you, God, And somehow when I heard that, what I felt, I mean, I don't know if this is a stretch, but what I felt was that what that exercise with the paintbrush thing was showing me was somehow the distance that I felt between the intimacy here and the intimacy out there. Like somehow there was this gulf that I was trying to bridge, with this exercise. But I was in that moment seeing like kind of what Sveta was talking about with because this prayer, while it is a prayer of longing for union, it's also an acknowledgement of the separation.
Of course.
So I was somehow feeling that distance, that separation, and just the like pain of that separation. So that was one experience that happened. And then later on in the day, there was another experience that seemed distinct, but anyway, that I will relate back to this. So after I started coming here, sometimes during meditations, I would experience this feeling, this feeling in the head, and it was a kind of, what it felt like, how I described it to myself was like as if somebody had kind of reached into my mind and was kind of holding, it's like a kind of pressure, and where not that the thoughts are, that there is no thought activity, but somehow the thoughts become peripheral and there's this pressure in the center, and it's a very pleasant feeling, it's a very, like I thought it was some kind of, I don't know, meditative state or something, or you talk about sometimes the body being touched by an experience of consciousness, and because the pleasure of it was it seemed so close to happiness and peace. But normally it's very fleeting because, as soon as I open my eyes or as soon as I do anything, it goes away. But yesterday, this feeling, it was there, and then it stayed. Like it had a weight to it, and even when I was interacting with people or, even driving home, I could still feel. Anyway, because it was, normally I'm kind of wanting to hang on to, like, milk the experience, basically, because I'm afraid that it's going to end, But this time, because I wasn't, it seemed to like it was going to be there for a while. So it gave me a chance to look at it, basically. And what I realized was that it was also a bodily sensation. I mean, it was a bodily sensation. And, then I was thinking about all these terms I was using to describe it, like pressure in the head, pleasant and intimate. And then I realized that it was a feeling, like a sense of, me. And at first I didn't want to accept, because it seemed like something this good couldn't be bad, And like with the sense of lack, it's easy to see that it's, the reaction is, I want to get the hell out of here. Whereas with this feeling, it's more like, I want to stay here forever, So I didn't want to accept that this was a sense of me. But then once I realized that no matter how pleasant, if it's something that I can perceive, as you always say, then it cannot be me. And also, because of that thing with the intimacy, I realized that, it's not that I had to give up the intimacy of that feeling. So then I was like, oh, I can just expand this feeling, this pleasurable feeling, into the space. And I noticed for a split second there was this thought of like, I don't want to, because then somehow I felt that the pressure would diffuse and I would no longer have this pleasurable sensation to myself. In other words, I didn't want to offer this sensation to the space. I wanted to keep it for myself. And so I saw that, and then I saw kind of like, in a way how silly that was. And so then I tried to do this expansion of the intimacy and of the feeling, and or the intimacy of that, feeling. And then it didn't really want to, so it was kind of like a frozen block of ice that I was trying to force to melt. So I felt like I was trying to manipulate it, so then I stopped. But the connection that I made was that it was this sort of attachment or hanging on to this feeling, the wanting to keep it to myself, that was creating this separation, because I wasn't offering it to the space.
Also perhaps because you were trying to do something artificial, whereas this experience was just natural and spontaneous. So
you mean the experience of the feeling in the head? Pressure.
Yeah. Because often when we have the perfume of our true nature, there are bodily sensations that accompany that. And we have the tendency to not to discriminate, to identify the sensation with the perfume that comes with it. That's Anandamaya Kosha right there. So it is better when we have this type of spontaneous happenings to enjoy it for as long as it lasts, and don't put your dirty finger into it.
So it's not something that is like the gremlin thing, like how you're talking about. It's something that seems cute.
No, because that which seems cute is a sense of me, very localized, but that's different when you have a sensation in the body that corresponds, for instance, to the mind getting still. Then in the stillness of the mind you may have a sense of expansion of the head, for instance. This sense of expansion of the head is simply a byproduct of some deep relaxation in the brain. So relaxation takes place down to the cellular level. It's not just in the muscles, it's also in the organs, including the brain. That's something that Jean, who was an MD, said, well, that is not recognized by medicine, but one thing is obvious, is this, is that when a muscle relaxes, this muscle is made of cells. So the relaxation of the muscle is only possible because the relaxation takes place at the cellular level. Right? So if relaxation can take place in the muscle cells, why wouldn't similar mechanism be taking place in the liver cells, in the pancreas cells, and in the brain cells? You see, so that's it's just that we don't know. We have not explored that. We can explore the muscles and see when they contract and relax. We can measure that. It's more difficult on the other organs. But yeah, only that was just a parenthesis.
Well, that's interesting because it would feel somehow like a massaging of the brain, you know, like a nice. But so, I guess maybe it's a matter of that I wasn't discriminating between, like I somehow yesterday it felt like it was a feeling rather than, I don't know.
Yeah, but the feeling, it comes with a pleasantness.
Right, but you know how we were talking about something, the sense of me is pleasant. So I guess I got confused thinking that.
Yeah, but in this case it's different. When it's an expansion, it's different.
Well,
the sense of me is cute, but it's not. It's more something I'm attached to. That is different. That is more the leftovers on the body of the body having been visited by the spirit. So it's a different type of experience. But going back to the tantric trick you were mentioning, of course, one is to paint, to take this intimate sensation, is to paint the entire space. But another one that I gave also, which is easier, is to take objects, specific objects, and to grant them the intimacy. And something that I'm sure you may have noticed is that in the presence of an object which is beautiful or lovely, without noticing it, we grant this object the intimacy. For instance, the little girl with the thing, I'm sure she felt very intimate with the little girl, with this object. You see? Or when you see something, why? Because the beauty erases the barriers in us, the separation. The beauty has this, it's a separation eraser. So then immediately we feel the intimacy. And also if someone is loving, let's say someone who has a natural smile, and they smile at us and it breaks our defenses. You see? So immediately the intimacy gets, the communication takes place on that level. So this thing that takes place with beautiful objects, the point I'm making, with beautiful objects, can be practiced with a neutral object, chairs, etc. You see what I mean? It's an exercise, it's an experiment. And then see how that changes our view of the world down the road when we practice that. Because most people although they don't realize it, they don't express it the way I'm expressing it, but most people know the experience of, we have this expression, a disarming smile. A disarming smile. It says exactly that. Someone has a smile and we crack, right? So we know that. So that's what everybody has. So the point here is different, is to have a disarming universe.
Thank you.
I have a question on attention. And sometimes when my attention, I can attend to an object and also to the knowing of that object, and I can contemplate or consider the qualities of the knowing that's taking place. And it's like I'm in a halfway house, right, between the jail and freedom, kind of on parole. So when I see the knowing, and there's a certain, it has no qualities as advertised, but it's really good to be there. And sometimes I lose it. My attention does not stay there. A lot of the time it just flops back into just the consideration of the object. So
I'm not certain of what you're saying. You see, when I focus my attention on an object,
yeah, it could be anything. It could be a physical object or an internal sensation or a resistance or...
So then you focus your attention on an object.
I am aware of it.
Hmm?
I am aware that there is an object there. There is a sensation or a perception.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, like today in the meditation, I kept my eyes open. I was aware of the landscape. And it was beautiful. And I was like, okay, what, it suddenly dawned on me that something knows that the landscape is there. My awareness, for want of a better word. And that has, it doesn't have a story, it doesn't have any qualities, etc. Right? And that was, I was considering it, and it was good. But then, like now, I'm just aware of, speech and this room and people and things, and so I guess my question is that witnessing or knowing, or that, is it something to, and sometimes it's effortless, and like sometimes I have to, so I guess I should not make an effort to grasp that.
Yeah. It has to be, the most important thing you can do is when you are interested in something which is said here, only when you are interested, to just follow your interest wherever it takes you. And so it will take you to moments of understanding. And in the Indian tradition, one moment of understanding is worth lifetimes of japa.
Yeah, and I get that now, because
One little blinking of the inner eye, just a little opening of the inner eye. Tup.
so I've had a few blinkings of this eye, but I want it to be like open, wide open all the time. Like you were saying, like the eye should vanish.
What you see in the blinking of this eye is that the eye is wide open all the time.
Yeah, but I did get that.
So don't forget the blinking. What you see in the blinking, you shouldn't forget it. If you see it, in the blinking you see there is no blinking. It's always open.
And I want to remember that not as a memory, but as experientially.
Yeah, but it's always true experientially. So it's good to remember it as a memory, because remember that it is always true experientially, that you can check it. Something which is not always true experientially, no value, just let it go. Be interested only in that which is always true experientially. In other words, liberation is now or never. Liberation has always been or will never be.
I just hate it when I feel like I've been liberated, but then I got caught again and put back in jail. And
The moment you feel that you are caught again, you are caught again. That's a koan.
one more. You're talking about the gremlins
Mm-hmm.
and the whack-a-mole. Guacamole. What? Oh, better? Yes. And the guacamole. Sorry.
Yeah.
And I've been conscious of these gremlins for most of my life, and it's really an uphill battle to get rid of them. But something clicked a few days back, and it might have been my variation on one of your tantric stuff, but when I was like, had this feeling that, okay, I should allow myself to be just wide open and like a dissected frog on a table, and have those intimate, cute monsters just like visible to, and taken your assumption, which is that of a universality that's seeing everything. And for some reason, that was just dissolving everything right away. So whack-a-mole was happening constantly. And it felt good.
Well, when you come here in this company, the teaching is not always where it seems to be. And perhaps it's that the teaching is everywhere. When I met my teacher, I had been meditating and with a great intensity, reading, searching, for 2 years. But really, it was a full-time job. And I needed a few adjustments that made all the difference. You know, it's like this system we have here to do the webcasts. Usually it works. But in the chain of transmission of data, you have one weak point, right? And then it doesn't work. In other words, you need this tiny adjustment, which is perhaps to make sure that something is plugged correctly, right? So just something as stupid as that. A tiny adjustment that makes all the difference, a night and day difference. And when I met my teacher, there were a few plugs that were not well plugged in. So he just plugged them in, and it made all the difference. I could see the movie. Okay. Happy Thanksgiving.